The sickening sound of ripping fabric echoed through Westfield High School's main corridor as Maya Chun's navy blue skirt tore from waist to knee, exposing her to 37 smartphones capturing every angle. Jake Morrison, 6'2" of quarterback arrogance, was still smirking when Maya's lightning-fast Shuto strike sent him crashing backwards into the trophy display case. In 8 seconds flat, 3 varsity athletes lay groaning on the polished linoleum floor, and the secret Maya had carefully hidden for 2 weeks was about to explode across every social media platform in Riverside, California. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Chun had stepped through the glass doors of Westfield High School on a crisp Monday morning in late September, her worn backpack looking painfully modest among the designer bags and expensive gadgets surrounding her. At 17, she was smaller than most of her new classmates, standing just 5'4" with straight black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and dark brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. The admissions office had been delighted to accept her transfer application, impressive grades from her Portland high school, glowing recommendations from teachers who praised her quiet dedication, and standardized test scores that placed her in the top 5% nationally. What her transcripts didn't reveal was why Maya and her father had really left Oregon, or why she'd spent the last 18 months training 6 days a week at Yamamoto Karate Dojo under the guidance of Sensei Williams, a former Olympic competitor who specialized in traditional Shotokan karate. The paperwork said nothing about the surgical scar hidden beneath her long-sleeved shirts, or why she'd insisted on legally emancipating herself from her mother's custody exactly 1 year ago. Most importantly, her records made no mention of the 3 boys from Lincoln High School in Portland, who were currently serving juvenile detention sentences for what the court had classified as aggravated assault and attempted sexual battery. Westfield High was supposed to represent a fresh beginning, a place where Maya could focus on her senior year without the weight of her past following her like a shadow. Her father, David, had taken a job as a software engineer with a tech startup in Riverside, and they'd moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in the Oak Street complex, far from the upscale neighborhoods where most Westfield students lived. Maya had specifically requested a transfer to a school where nobody knew her story, where she could simply be another student working toward graduation and college acceptance. The first warning sign appeared during her second period advanced placement literature class. Maya had chosen a seat in the middle row, close enough to participate, but not so prominent as to draw unwanted attention. She was taking notes on Mrs. Patterson's lecture about symbolism in contemporary fiction when the classroom door swung open with deliberate force. Jake Morrison strolled in 25 minutes late, his Letterman jacket draped casually over his shoulder and the unmistakable scent of marijuana clinging to his clothes like expensive cologne. Mrs. Patterson, a veteran teacher with silver hair and tired eyes, barely looked up from her whiteboard. "Take your seat, Jake. We're discussing the use of metaphor in modern literature." Jake's entrance had caused a ripple of awareness through the classroom, conversation stopping mid-sentence as students turned to watch his performance. This was clearly a well-rehearsed routine, Maya realized, observing how the other students seemed to expect and accept his disruption as natural as breathing. Jake Morrison was everything Maya had learned to recognize as dangerous in her previous school. Tall and athletic with the kind of confident swagger that came from never facing real consequences, he moved through the classroom like he owned not just the space, but everyone in it. His sandy brown hair was perfectly styled. His expensive sneakers probably cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe, and when he smiled, it never quite reached his pale blue eyes. Behind him, his constant companions, Tyler Webb and Connor Blake, had materialized in the doorway, forming what Maya immediately recognized as a pack. Tyler was lean and quick, with the restless energy of someone who'd never learned to sit still, while Connor displayed the casual arrogance that came with generational wealth. Maya had researched the school's social dynamics online before transferring, and these three names appeared in every article about Westfield's athletic achievements and academic honors. What the school newspaper didn't mention was how other students seemed to shrink back when they passed, or how conversations died whenever they entered a room. As Jake finally settled into his seat, his gaze swept across the classroom and landed on Maya with the focused intensity of a predator identifying new prey. She felt his eyes cataloging her discount clothes, her drugstore backpack, her obvious outsider status. Maya had experienced this moment before, the instant when bullies recognized vulnerability and began calculating their approach. She kept her expression neutral, her breathing steady, and her hands relaxed on her desktop, giving no indication that she'd noticed his attention. After class, Maya gathered her materials quickly, hoping to blend into the crowd of students heading toward third period. She'd made it halfway down the main corridor when she heard footsteps matching her pace. "Hey, new girl," Tyler's voice called out, loud enough to draw attention from passing students. "Where you heading in such a hurry?" Maya stopped walking but didn't turn around immediately. She could feel other students slowing their pace, sensing the beginning of entertainment. When she finally faced Tyler, Jake and Connor had flanked him, creating a semicircle that blocked her path forward. "I'm trying to get to chemistry," Maya said calmly, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard clearly by the growing audience. "Chemistry, huh?" Jake stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that appeared accidental, but felt completely intentional. "That's interesting. I'm great at chemistry. The kind between people, you know what I mean?" His comment drew snickers from several students, while others pulled out their phones, anticipating something worth recording. Maya recognized the setup immediately. This was how it always started, with seemingly innocent comments that gradually escalated until the target was either humiliated into submission or provoked into a reaction that could be used against them. She'd watched this exact scenario play out dozens of times at Lincoln High before everything went wrong. "I really need to get to class," she said, taking a step to the side to move around them. Connor smoothly shifted to block her path, his movement appearing casual to observers, but clearly deliberate. "Don't be so antisocial," he said with a grin that didn't match the coldness in his eyes. "We're just being friendly. Isn't that right, guys? We always welcome new students to Westfield." The crowd was growing larger now, forming a loose circle around the confrontation, phones raised and ready. "Absolutely," Tyler agreed, moving closer to Maya's other side. "We like to make sure new students understand how things work around here. The social dynamics, you know. Who's who, what's expected." Maya found herself surrounded, her exit route systematically eliminated while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. Jake leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a tone that wouldn't carry to the watching crowd. "Here's the thing about Westfield, Maya Shen. Yes, I know your name. I know you transferred from Portland. I know your dad's some kind of computer nerd. And I know you're living in that apartment complex on Oak Street. Information travels fast around here." Maya's stomach tightened as she realized they'd already investigated her background, probably within hours of her enrollment. "The thing is," Jake continued, his tone conversational but his eyes hard, "we have certain traditions here. Ways of making sure everyone knows their place in the social order. You seem like a smart girl, so I'm sure you'll figure out how to fit in without causing any problems." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, wrapped in language that could be dismissed as friendly advice if anyone questioned it later. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the surge of adrenaline that came from recognizing genuine danger. But 18 months of intensive training had taught her to channel that energy, to use it rather than be controlled by it. "I appreciate the welcome," she said evenly, her voice carrying no trace of the fear they expected to hear. "But I really do need to get to class now." She moved forward with calm determination, forcing them to either step aside or make their intentions more obvious. For a moment, the tension hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Then Jake stepped back with a laugh that sounded almost genuine. "Of course. We wouldn't want you to be late on your first week. See you around." Maya. As the crowd dispersed and Maya continued toward her chemistry class, she heard Tyler's voice behind her, pitched just loud enough for her to hear. "This is going to be fun." Maya didn't look back, but she began mentally preparing for what she knew was coming. The game had begun, and she was about to discover whether her training would be enough to survive it. The harassment campaign began subtly, as it always did. On Wednesday of her first week, Maya discovered that someone had gone through her locker, not stealing anything but rearranging her belongings in a way that made it clear they'd been inside. Her combination lock showed no signs of tampering, suggesting either exceptional skill or inside knowledge from someone with administrative access. By Thursday, explicit photos of her face photoshopped onto pornographic images were being circulated through private social media groups, carefully distributed to avoid easy detection by school authorities. Maya documented everything with the methodical precision her father had taught her during their late-night conversations about digital security. Every incident was photographed, screenshotted, and backed up to multiple cloud storage accounts. She'd learned from her previous experience that evidence was everything, and that perpetrators relied on their victims' inability to prove systematic harassment. The psychological warfare escalated during her second week. Maya's car, her father's used Honda Civic, was found with all 4 tires slashed in the student parking lot. Security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the exact time window when the vandalism occurred, a coincidence that seemed to surprise no one in the administration. When Maya reported the incident to Principal Anderson, his response followed a predictable pattern of deflection and victim blaming. "These things happen in parking lots," Principal Anderson said, barely looking up from his computer screen as Maya sat in his cramped office. "Vandalism is unfortunately common among teenagers. Have you considered whether you might have inadvertently offended someone? Sometimes new students don't understand the social dynamics that have developed over time." Maya kept her voice steady, despite the anger building in her chest. "Principal Anderson, this is clearly targeted harassment. The timing, the specific targeting of my vehicle, the camera malfunction. This wasn't random vandalism." She pulled out her phone, showing him screenshots of the explicit images that had been circulating. "And this definitely isn't random." Anderson glanced at the images with obvious discomfort, then quickly looked away. "Social media harassment is difficult to prosecute, especially when we can't determine the original source. These images could have been created by anyone, distributed by anyone. Without concrete evidence linking specific students to specific actions, our hands are tied." "What about investigating Jake Morrison, Tyler Webb, and Connor Blake?" Maya asked directly. "They've been involved in every incident, either directly or through their associates. Their behavior patterns are clearly documented." Anderson's expression hardened slightly. "Maya, I understand you're frustrated, but I need to caution you against making accusations without proof. Jake Morrison is our quarterback, Tyler Webb is student body vice president, and Connor Blake's family has been instrumental in funding our new computer lab. These are good kids from good families. Perhaps if you focused on integrating more positively into our community rather than looking for conflict, you'd find Westfield a more welcoming place." Maya realized she was facing the same institutional protection that had failed her in Portland. The administration would protect valuable students regardless of their behavior, while placing the burden of adaptation on their victims. But this time, she was prepared for the system's failure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This time she had a plan. That evening, Maya stood in her bedroom practicing kata forms with fluid precision. Heian Shoden, Heian Niden, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next, as she worked through the fundamental patterns that had become as natural as breathing. Her body remembered every lesson Sensei Williams had taught her about distance, timing, and leverage. More importantly, her mind had absorbed his teachings about patience, preparation, and choosing your battles wisely. Maya's father knocked softly on her door before entering, carrying 2 cups of green tea. David Chun was a quiet man who'd raised his daughter alone since her mother's abandonment when Maya was 14. He'd learned to read his daughter's moods with parental intuition, sharpened by years of supporting her through difficult transitions. "How was school today?" he asked, settling into the chair by her desk. It was their ritual, these evening conversations, that had become more important than ever since Portland. Maya paused her practice, accepting the tea gratefully. "They're escalating," she said simply. David nodded, unsurprised. They'd both known this day would come, had prepared for it during countless conversations about standing up to bullies while protecting yourself legally and physically. "Are you ready?" David asked. It was a serious question, one that acknowledged the weight of what they both knew was approaching. Maya had been ready since her first day at Westfield, but readiness and willingness were different things entirely. "I have to be," Maya replied. "Because if I don't stop this here, it'll just continue. And the next girl who transfers here, or the next student they target, won't have the training I do. Someone has to be the last victim." David smiled sadly at his daughter's wisdom. At 17, Maya had already learned lessons that most adults never fully grasped about courage, justice, and the responsibility that came with the ability to defend yourself and others. Just remember everything Sensei Williams taught you about control. Use only what's necessary, document everything, and make sure you're legally protected. Maya nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. Tomorrow would bring new escalations, and eventually, Jake Morrison and his friends would push too far. When that moment came, Maya would be ready to end their game permanently, but she would do it the right way, with witnesses, evidence, and legal justification. That couldn't be questioned or dismissed. The final escalation began on Friday morning of Maya's 3rd week at Westfield High School. She arrived early, as had become her habit, using the extra time to study in the library and avoid the social dynamics of crowded hallways. But as she walked toward her locker, Maya noticed an unusual emptiness in the main corridor. Students who were normally clustered around their lockers had mysteriously disappeared, and the few who remained watched her with expressions ranging from pity to excitement. Maya's training had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct was now screaming danger. The corridor felt like a stage set for performance, too empty, too quiet, too carefully arranged. As she approached her locker, she noticed Tyler Webb leaning casually against the wall nearby, his phone held in a way that could easily be recording. Connor Blake was positioned near the main entrance, blocking her most obvious exit route. Maya opened her locker with deliberate calm, hyper-aware of her surroundings while appearing to focus on gathering her books. In her peripheral vision, she counted at least 12 other students strategically positioned throughout the hallway, all with phones ready. Whatever Jake Morrison had planned, he'd recruited an audience to witness it. "Morning, Maya," Jake's voice came from directly behind her, closer than she'd expected. Maya turned slowly, unsurprised to find him invading her personal space with the kind of aggressive intimacy designed to intimidate. "Beautiful day, isn't it? Perfect for outdoor activities. Sports, maybe some friendly competition." Maya recognized the coded language immediately. In Portland, her attackers had used similar euphemisms before their assault, speaking in terms that sounded innocent to casual observers but carried clear threats to their intended target. "Good morning, Jake," she replied calmly. "I need to Get to first period." "Actually," Jake stepped closer, his bulk blocking her path to the main corridor, "I was thinking we could have a little chat first. About school spirit, maybe. Team-building exercises." His smile never wavered, but Maya could see the predatory calculation in his eyes. This was it, the moment they'd been building toward since her first day. Tyler and Connor began moving closer, creating the same semicircle formation they'd used during their first confrontation. But this time, the positioning was more aggressive, more obviously threatening. Maya realized they'd grown tired of subtle intimidation and were ready for direct action. "You know," Jake continued, his voice carrying clearly for the recording. "Phones, I've been thinking about what we discussed before. About understanding your place here at Westfield. I don't think you've really grasped the concept yet." He reached out as if to touch her shoulder, a gesture that would appear friendly to observers, but felt like a violation of her personal space. Maya stepped back smoothly, maintaining distance while keeping her hands visible and relaxed. "I think I understand perfectly," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline now flowing through her system. "But I really do need to get to class." "Class can wait," Connor said, moving to block her path toward the east wing. "This is more important. Consider it a private tutorial about social dynamics." The circle was tightening now, and Maya found herself surrounded by three larger, stronger opponents while their audience captured every moment on video. Maya felt the familiar calm that came from accepting inevitable conflict. Her training had taught her that sometimes violence was unavoidable, that predators would continue escalating until they were stopped by force. But it had also taught her patience, the ability to wait for the perfect moment when legal justification was unquestionable. "I'm asking you politely to let me pass," Maya said clearly, ensuring her words would be captured by the recording devices. "I don't want any trouble, and I need to get to my first period class." She was establishing a clear record of attempting to avoid conflict, of seeking peaceful resolution before any physical confrontation began. Jake's mask of false friendliness finally slipped, revealing the cruelty that had always lurked beneath. "You know what your problem is, Maya. You think you're better than everyone here. You think you can just show up at our school and ignore our traditions. But every new student has to go through initiation. It's how we make sure you understand. The hierarchy." That's when Tyler moved, stepping forward to grab Maya's backpack strap. "Let's see what the new girl's hiding in here," he said with a grin, yanking hard to pull the bag off her shoulder. The sudden motion caused Maya to stumble slightly, and in that moment of apparent vulnerability, Connor reached for the hem of her skirt. "Maybe we should check if she's wearing Westfield colors underneath," Connor said with a laugh that had nothing to do with humor. His fingers caught the fabric of Maya's navy blue skirt, and with a sharp tug intended to expose her to the recording audience, he pulled hard enough to tear the material from waist to knee. The sound of ripping fabric seemed to echo through the suddenly silent hallway as Maya stood exposed, her torn skirt fluttering around her legs. For a heartbeat, everyone froze, phones capturing every angle of her humiliation. Jake Morrison was still laughing, Tyler was reaching for more of her clothing, and Connor was preparing to grab her arms when Maya Chun did something none of them expected. She smiled. "Gentlemen," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly for all the recording devices, "you just committed sexual assault in front of 37 witnesses. But more importantly," she dropped into a perfect karate stance, her weight balanced and her hands positioned for maximum effectiveness, "you just gave me legal justification for self-defense." The transformation was instantaneous and shocking. Maya's entire demeanor shifted from victim to predator, from helpless target to dangerous opponent. Jake's laughter died as he suddenly realized that the quiet new girl was not what she had seemed. "Get her," Jake snarled, his embarrassment at being outmaneuvered translating into rage. They came at her together, a coordinated attack that might have overwhelmed an ordinary victim. But Maya-chan was not ordinary, and 18 months of intensive training had prepared her for exactly this moment. Tyler reached her first, grabbing for her throat with both hands in a move designed to intimidate rather than seriously harm. Maya responded with a perfect Shudo strike, her hand moving like lightning to strike his solar plexus. Tyler folded. Instantly, the breath driven from his lungs as he collapsed to the floor, gasping. Connor, seeing his friend fall, charged forward with his arms spread to tackle Maya around the waist. Maya sidestepped smoothly, using his momentum against him with a textbook Osoto Gari leg sweep. Connor's feet left the ground, and he crashed into the lockers with a sound like thunder, sliding down the metal doors to land in a heap. Jake Morrison, former quarterback and self-appointed king of Westfield High School, found himself facing an opponent who had just defeated 2 of his friends in less than 5 seconds. His football training told him to go low, to use his size and strength advantage. Maya's karate training told her exactly how to counter such an attack. As Jake charged forward, Maya stepped into his attack rather than away from it, using his momentum to execute a perfect hip throw that sent all 6'2" of him flying through the air. Jake crashed into the trophy display case with enough force to shatter glass and send awards scattering across the polished floor. The entire confrontation had lasted 8 seconds. Maya stood in the center of the hallway, her torn skirt still fluttering but her stance rock solid, while 3 of Westfield's most privileged students lay groaning on the linoleum. The watching crowd was absolutely silent, phone still recording, capturing an image that would change everything at Riverside's most prestigious public high school. Maya looked directly at the nearest camera, speaking clearly for the record. "I am Maya Chun, a student at Westfield High School. These 3 individuals just sexually assaulted me by tearing my clothing in front of witnesses. I defended myself using karate techniques I learned after being attacked at my previous school. Everything I did was legal self-defense in response to their criminal behavior." She pulled out her own phone, showing that she too had been recording. "I have extensive documentation of their 3-week harassment campaign against me, including evidence of property destruction, digital harassment, and systematic intimidation. I will be pressing charges for sexual assault, and I expect the school administration to take appropriate action to protect other students from similar attacks." Principal Anderson arrived at a run, alerted by students who had fled the scene. As soon as the violence began, his face went through a spectacular range of expressions as he processed what he was seeing. His star quarterback unconscious in a pile of broken glass, 2 other prominent students writhing on the floor, and Maya Chen standing victorious despite her torn clothing. "What in God's name happened here?" Anderson demanded, his voice cracking with stress. Maya could see him mentally calculating the public relations disaster that was about to engulf his school. "These 3 students sexually assaulted me," Maya replied calmly. "They tore my skirt off in front of witnesses as part of what they called an initiation ritual. I defended myself using reasonable force to stop their attack. I'll need to file a police report, and I'll need all security camera footage preserved as evidence." Anderson's eyes darted to the crowd of students still recording everything. "Now hold on," he began desperately. "Let's not be hasty. I'm sure this is all a big misunderstanding. These are good boys, they wouldn't. They tore my clothes off," Maya interrupted, her voice cutting through Anderson's denial like a blade. "In front of 37 recording devices. Are you suggesting that's acceptable behavior at Westfield High School?" The crowd began murmuring, phones shifting between Maya and Anderson's increasingly uncomfortable expression. Someone whispered that this was already going viral, that the hashtag Westfield Assault was trending on local social media. Anderson realized that his careful political balancing act was about to collapse in spectacular fashion. Maya had won more than just a physical confrontation. She had won the information war, the legal war, and most importantly, The cultural war that had protected bullies like Jake Morrison for far too long. As sirens wailed in the distance, announcing the arrival of police and paramedics, Maya's son stood tall in her torn skirt, no longer a victim, but a victor who had changed everything with 8 seconds of perfectly executed self-defense. The revolution at Westfield High School had begun, and it would reshape not just the culture of one school, but the entire conversation about bullying, consent, and the power of one person who refused to be silenced. The message arrived in Maya's inbox 3 weeks after the Westfield incident had exploded across social media platforms nationwide. It came from a 17-year-old girl named Jessica in Phoenix, Arizona, whose hands had trembled as she typed each word. Dear Maya, I saw your video where you stood up to those bullies. I've been dealing with something similar at my school for 2 months now. 3 boys on the basketball team have been following me around, making comments about my body, trying to corner me in empty hallways. Yesterday, one of them grabbed my shirt in the cafeteria and tried to lift it up while his friends recorded on their phones. I pushed him away and reported it to the principal, but they said it was just boys being boys. After seeing what you did, I realized I don't have to accept this. I'm starting self-defense classes next week. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to fight back. Another message came from a teacher in Denver, Colorado, a 34-year-old woman who had been enduring systematic workplace harassment from male colleagues for 6 months. Maya, watching your story gave me the courage to finally document everything that's been happening to me. I've been keeping detailed records now, just like you did. Last week, I filed a formal complaint with the school district and contacted a lawyer. For the first time in months, I feel like I have some power back. Your example showed me that victims don't have to stay victims forever. From Dallas, Texas, came a message from a 15-year-old boy whose story broke Maya's heart. I know your situation was different because you're a girl, but I wanted you to know that your courage inspired me too. I've been bullied by a group of seniors for being small and quiet. They've been escalating their attacks, pushing me in hallways, destroying my homework, threatening worse things. I never fought back because I was afraid of getting in trouble. But after seeing how you documented everything and defended yourself legally, I realized I had options. I started recording their threats, taking pictures of the damage they did to my things. When they cornered me in the bathroom last week and tried to stuff my head in the toilet, I reported everything to the police with all my evidence. 3 of them were arrested, and the school finally took action. You helped me understand that being smart about how you fight back is just as important as being brave enough to do it. These messages kept coming, day after day, from every corner of the country and beyond. Students who had found the strength to report harassment after staying silent for months. Teachers who had quit accepting inappropriate behavior from colleagues and administrators. Parents who had learned to take their children's complaints about bullying seriously instead of dismissing them as typical teenage drama. Each story was different, but they all shared a common thread. Seeing Maya Chun refuse to be a victim had inspired others to reclaim their own power. Maya sat in her bedroom reading these messages late at night, her father's laptop open on her desk as she carefully responded to each one. Some writers asked for specific advice about documentation techniques. Others wanted to know about self-defense training options in their areas. Many simply needed someone to tell them that their experiences were valid, that they deserved safety and respect, that fighting back was not only acceptable but necessary. The ripple effects had spread far beyond individual cases of bullying. School districts across the country had begun implementing new policies for handling harassment complaints, prompted by the public attention Maya's case had generated. The Westfield Protocol had become shorthand for comprehensive documentation, requirements, immediate investigation procedures, and zero-tolerance policies that couldn't be circumvented by family wealth or social status. Maya's methodical approach to evidence, Gathering had been studied and replicated by legal advocates working with young victims of assault and harassment. Maya's phone buzzed with a notification from a news app. A school in Michigan had just suspended 5 football players for sexually harassing a female teacher, with the superintendent specifically citing the need to prevent another Westfield situation. In Florida, a principal had been fired for failing to investigate reports of student-on-student sexual assault, with the school board referencing Maya's case as an example of institutional failure they refused to tolerate. The cultural conversation had shifted in fundamental ways, with silence no longer seen as an acceptable response to systematic abuse. But perhaps the most meaningful messages came from other students who had been directly inspired to learn self-defense. Martial arts schools across the country reported massive increases in enrollment, particularly among teenage girls seeking to protect themselves. Maya had partnered with several national chains to offer scholarship programs for students who couldn't afford training fees, funded by speaking engagements and book deals that had emerged from her story. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that her attempts to avoid attention had instead made her a reluctant symbol of resistance. She had never wanted to be famous, had never sought to become a spokesperson for victims' rights. All she had wanted was to finish her senior year in peace, to move on from the trauma of Portland and build a normal life with her father. Instead, she had become the face of a movement that was reshaping how society thought about bullying, consent, and the responsibility of institutions to protect the vulnerable. Yet as Maya read message after message from young people who had found their voices because of her example, she began to understand that her story had never really been just about her. Every time she had documented Jake Morrison's harassment, every moment she had spent training in preparation for inevitable confrontation, every second of that 8-second fight in Westfield's hallway, she had been fighting not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after her. Maya closed the laptop and looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The girl staring back at her looked older than 17, marked by experiences that had forced her to grow up faster than any teenager should have to. But she also looked stronger, more confident, more at peace with herself than the frightened transfer student who had walked into Westfield High School just months earlier. She had learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never wanted to fight, and that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others find their strength. Maya had college applications to complete, graduation requirements to fulfill, and a future to build beyond the shadow of high school trauma. But she also had a responsibility now to the thousands of young people who looked to her example for hope and guidance. She had discovered that being a survivor meant more than just healing from your own wounds. It meant using your scars to light the way for others still finding their path out of darkness. The transformation was complete. Maya Chun had arrived at Westfield as a victim seeking to hide from her past. She was leaving as a warrior who had shown the world that even the most vulnerable among us possessed the power to change everything when they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. The scared, silent girl from Portland was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that her voice, her story, and her courage belonged not just to her, but to everyone who needed to believe that fighting back was possible. Maya's first impression of Westfield High School had been carefully calculated ordinariness. Everything about her appearance, her behavior, and her background had been designed to blend seamlessly into the crowd of middle-class students who made up the majority of the school's population. She had studied the school's demographics online, analyzed social media profiles of current students, and crafted a persona that would attract minimal attention while she focused on her primary goal, graduating without incident. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of unremarkable pieces purchased from discount retailers and chain stores. Simple jeans that fit well but bore no designer labels, basic sweaters in neutral colors that wouldn't stand out in classroom settings, and practical sneakers chosen for comfort rather than fashion trends. Maya had deliberately avoided anything that might signal wealth or poverty, status or rebellion. She dressed like someone who had never considered clothing as a form of self-expression, someone whose main concern was meeting dress code requirements while staying invisible in crowded hallways. Maya's academic approach followed the same principles of strategic mediocrity. Her grades from Portland had been excellent, but she had learned to moderate her classroom participation to avoid the kind of attention that came with being labeled a teacher's pet or academic overachiever. She answered questions when called upon but rarely volunteered information. Her homework was always completed on time and met assignment requirements without demonstrating exceptional creativity or insight that might mark her as different from her peers. During lunch periods, Maya chose seats at tables occupied by quiet, studious students who seemed content with casual conversation about homework assignments and weekend plans. She participated just enough to seem friendly while avoiding the kind of personal disclosures that might reveal inconsistencies in her carefully constructed background story. When classmates asked about her previous school in Portland, Maya provided vague but believable answers about family job relocations and new opportunities in California. Maya's social media presence reflected the same calculated normalcy. Her Instagram account contained exactly the kind of content expected from a 17-year-old girl: photos of homework sessions in coffee shops, snapshots of meals with her father, scenic shots of Riverside's downtown area taken during weekend walks. Her posts received modest numbers of likes and comments, enough to seem socially connected without suggesting popularity or controversy. She followed accounts related to her stated interests in literature and environmental science, avoiding anything that might hint at her martial arts background or traumatic experiences in Oregon. The apartment Maya shared with her father on Oak Street reinforced her middle-class image. David Chun had chosen the location specifically because it housed primarily working families, teacher aides, retail managers, and other solidly middle-income residents. Their two-bedroom unit was furnished simply but comfortably, with second-hand pieces that suggested careful budgeting rather than poverty or wealth. Maya's bedroom looked like any teenager's space: textbooks stacked on a simple desk, a few plants on the windowsill, and inspirational posters about academic achievement and environmental conservation. Maya's father supported her strategy of maintaining a low profile, understanding from their conversations about Portland that visibility often equated to vulnerability for young women in high school environments. David had coached his daughter on maintaining consistent stories about their background, their reasons for moving to Riverside, and their plans for her senior year and college applications. He played his role perfectly, attending parent-teacher conferences as a concerned but unremarkable single father, focused on his daughter's education and future opportunities. The guidance counselor who had reviewed Maya's transfer paperwork saw exactly what Maya had intended: a well-adjusted student from a stable home environment with solid academic credentials and realistic college aspirations. Maya had expressed interest in studying English literature at a state university, a goal that seemed both achievable and unmemorable. Her extracurricular activities at Portland had been limited to environmental club participation and volunteer work at a local animal shelter, choices that suggested social consciousness without political activism or competitive ambition. Maya's teachers formed similar impressions during her first weeks at Westfield. She submitted thoughtful essays that demonstrated good writing skills and literary comprehension, without the kind of analytical sophistication that might mark her as intellectually gifted. In mathematics and science classes, she completed assignments competently while asking occasional questions that suggested normal teenage struggles with challenging concepts. Her behavior was consistently respectful and engaged without being memorable or distinctive. The deception extended to Maya's daily routines and habits. She arrived at school at unremarkable times, neither early enough to suggest overachievement nor late enough to seem careless. She ate lunch foods that reflected typical teenage preferences, sandwiches packed from home, occasionally supplemented with items from the school cafeteria. During passing periods, she moved through hallways with purposeful but unhurried steps, acknowledging classmates with friendly nods while avoiding extended conversations that might require deeper personal revelations. Maya's carefully constructed facade had succeeded, so completely that even her teachers would later express shock when they learned about her martial arts expertise and traumatic background. Mrs. Patterson, her AP literature instructor, would tell reporters that Maya had seemed like just another bright, quiet student trying to fit in at a new school. Her chemistry teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, described her as conscientious and polite, but not someone who stood out in any particular way. The success of Maya's ordinary facade was perhaps best demonstrated by Jake Morrison's initial assessment of her as an easy target. His decision to focus his harassment campaign on the quiet new girl reflected his assumption that Maya possessed neither the social connections nor the personal resources to resist systematic intimidation. Jake's experience with previous victims had taught him to identify students who seemed isolated, vulnerable, and unlikely to fight back effectively. Maya's appearance of normalcy had been so convincing that even students who witnessed the early stages of Jake's harassment campaign expected her to follow the typical pattern of victim responses: silent endurance, eventual breakdown, or quiet withdrawal from the school. None of them suspected that the unassuming transfer student was methodically documenting every incident while preparing for a confrontation that would expose the entire system of institutional protection that enabled student predators. The contrast between Maya's ordinary facade and her extraordinary capabilities would ultimately become one of the most compelling aspects of her story. Media coverage consistently emphasized how misleading appearances could be, how assumptions about vulnerability based on size, demeanor, or background could prove catastrophically wrong for those who acted on them. Maya had understood intuitively that her greatest weapon was not her martial arts training, but her ability to be underestimated by those who meant her harm. Looking back, Maya's classmates would realize that her ordinariness had never been natural, but carefully performed. The quiet girl who had seemed to fade into classroom backgrounds had actually been observing everything, cataloging behaviors, identifying threats, and preparing responses. Her unremarkable appearance had been armor, protecting her while she gathered intelligence and planned her eventual counterattack. The facade had served its purpose perfectly, lulling her harassers into overconfidence while giving Maya the time and space she needed to prepare for battle. When the moment of confrontation finally arrived, Jake Morrison and his friends discovered that the ordinary girl they thought they were hunting had actually been hunting them, gathering evidence and waiting for them to provide the legal justification she needed to end their predatory behavior permanently. The first hint of Maya's concealed capabilities emerged in her AP literature class during a discussion of warrior archetypes in classical mythology. Mrs. Patterson had assigned comparative essays analyzing heroic journeys across different cultural traditions, and while most students struggled to connect ancient stories with contemporary relevance, Maya's submission demonstrated an understanding of combat psychology and strategic thinking that seemed far beyond typical teenage experience. Her essay on Sun Tzu's influence on modern conflict resolution contained insights about patience, preparation, and the psychological advantages of being underestimated that impressed Mrs. Patterson enough to request a private conference. When Maya arrived for their meeting, she had prepared explanations that maintained her cover story, while acknowledging her unusual perspective on strategic thinking. "Maya, your analysis of psychological warfare in ancient texts shows remarkable sophistication," Mrs. Patterson said, reviewing the essay with obvious admiration. "You write about tactical advantages and mental preparation as if you have personal experience with these concepts. Have you studied military history extensively?" Maya had anticipated this question and delivered her response with practiced casualness. "My father was in the Marines before I was born," she said, which was technically true though incomplete. "He taught me about strategic thinking when I was younger. We used to play chess and discuss problem-solving approaches. I guess some of that influenced how I think about conflict resolution." David Chun had indeed served in the military, but Maya's real education in strategic thinking had come from 18 months of intensive martial arts training under Sensei Williams, who had emphasized that physical techniques were only 20% of effective self-defense. The remaining 80% involved mental preparation, situational awareness, and the ability to project calm while calculating multiple response scenarios simultaneously. Maya's apparent expertise extended beyond academic analysis into practical applications that occasionally surfaced despite her efforts to maintain an ordinary persona. During a chemistry lab session, Tyler Webb had deliberately knocked over her carefully measured solutions, expecting the typical teenage response of frustration or tears. Instead, Maya had simply begun rebuilding her experiment with mechanical precision, showing no emotional reaction to the sabotage while mentally cataloging the incident for her growing evidence file. "Doesn't anything bother you?" Tyler had asked, frustrated by her lack of visible distress. Maya had looked up from her measurements with an expression of mild confusion, as if the question itself were puzzling. "I don't see the point in getting upset about things I can't control," she had replied calmly. "It's more efficient to focus on solutions." The response had left Tyler unsettled, though he couldn't articulate why. He had expected fear, anger, or helplessness. Maya's unnatural composure suggested someone who had learned to manage stress through experience rather than natural temperament. Maya's physical conditioning occasionally revealed itself in ways that contradicted her carefully crafted image of typical teenage fitness levels. During mandatory pay classes, she deliberately performed at average levels while internally calculating how to appear convincingly winded after activities that barely elevated her heart rate. Her actual conditioning was the result of hours spent training with Sensei Williams, whose program had included not just karate techniques but comprehensive physical preparation involving cardiovascular endurance, flexibility training, and strength building that had transformed Maya's body into a precisely calibrated weapon. The most challenging aspect of maintaining her facade involved concealing her hypervigilance and threat assessment abilities. 18 months of intensive training had rewired Maya's nervous system to continuously monitor her environment for potential dangers, track multiple individuals' movements simultaneously, and identify escape routes and defensive positions in any space she entered. These habits had become so automatic that suppressing them required constant conscious effort. Maya's heightened awareness manifested in subtle behaviors that occasionally puzzled her classmates. She invariably chose seats that provided clear views of all entrances while positioning herself near walls or other solid barriers that protected her back. Her backpack was always organized for rapid access to documentation tools and emergency supplies. She avoided wearing headphones or engaging in activities that compromised her ability to hear approaching footsteps or conversations. Her father noticed Maya's struggle to balance necessary vigilance with the appearance of normal teenage carelessness. During their evening conversations, he would remind her that complete relaxation was neither possible nor advisable, but that obvious hypervigilance might attract the wrong kind of attention from potential threats who were looking for victims with trauma histories. Remember that predators often target individuals who seem either completely naive or obviously damaged, David would counsel. Your goal is to appear confident but not threatening, aware but not paranoid. Let them think you're just another ordinary student until the moment you need them to understand otherwise. Maya's concealed martial arts expertise extended far beyond the basic self-defense techniques that many teenagers learned in community center classes. Sensei Williams had trained her in traditional Shotokan karate, But their program had also included elements of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for ground fighting, Krav Maga for real-world self-defense scenarios, and extensive study of legal frameworks governing self-defense claims. Maya understood not just how to disable attackers, but how to do so in ways that would be legally defensible and clearly proportional to the threats she faced. The psychological training had been equally comprehensive. Maya had learned to compartmentalize trauma responses, to function effectively under extreme stress, and to project calm authority in confrontational situations. Sensei Williams had emphasized that true martial artists avoided violence whenever possible, but were prepared to end threats quickly and decisively when avoidance became impossible. Maya's hidden depths also included technological capabilities that would prove crucial during her evidence-gathering campaign. Her father's background in software engineering had provided Maya with advanced understanding of digital security, data backup systems, and evidence preservation techniques that far exceeded typical teenage technical skills. She knew how to maintain anonymous online accounts, encrypt sensitive communications, and create multiple backup copies of documentation that would survive attempts at digital intimidation or destruction. Perhaps most importantly, Maya's concealed background included extensive knowledge of legal frameworks governing harassment, assault, and institutional liability. Her family's experience with the Portland case had involved months of legal consultations, during which Maya had absorbed detailed understanding of evidence requirements, documentation standards, and procedural requirements for successful prosecution of school-based sexual assault cases. Maya's hidden depths represented the transformation of trauma into empowerment, of victimization into preparation. Every skill she had developed, every capability she had acquired, every aspect of her enhanced awareness and preparedness had emerged from her determination, never again, to be helpless in the face of predatory behavior. The ordinary facade she maintained was not deception but camouflage, protecting her while she prepared to become something her future attackers could never anticipate or defend against. When Jake Morrison and his friends finally pushed their harassment campaign to the point of physical assault, they would discover that the quiet transfer student they had selected as an easy target was actually the most dangerous person in Westfield High School. Maya's hidden depths would emerge in 8 seconds of devastating effectiveness, revealing capabilities that transformed her from victim to victor and changed the power dynamics at Westfield forever. Westfield High School's social hierarchy operated like a medieval feudal system, with clearly defined classes, inherited privileges, and unwritten rules that governed every interaction between students of different status levels. At the apex of this carefully maintained structure sat a small group of families whose wealth, political connections, and generational influence over the school district created an environment where their children faced no meaningful consequences for their behavior. The Morrison family had established their dominance through David Morrison Sr.'s construction empire, which had built half the commercial developments in Riverside County over the past 20 years. Morrison Construction held contracts for ongoing school district maintenance, renovation projects, and the planned expansion of Westfield's athletic facilities. When the school board met monthly to discuss budgets and policies, David Morrison Sr.'s voice carried weight that had nothing to do with educational expertise and everything to do with financial leverage. Jake Morrison had inherited not just his father's physical presence, but his sense of entitlement to control over institutional spaces. Teachers who had worked at Westfield for decades could recount stories of Morrison men who had attended the school going back to the 1970s, each generation leaving behind legends of athletic achievement and behavioral problems that were quietly resolved through family influence rather than disciplinary procedures. The Morrison donation history read like a catalog of institutional capture. The new weight room bore a plaque honoring David Morrison Sr.'s contribution to student-athlete development. The renovated auditorium featured Morrison Construction logos prominently displayed near the main entrance. Most significantly, the Morrison Family Scholarship Fund provided full college tuition assistance to graduating seniors who demonstrated both academic achievement and proper appreciation for traditional Westfield values as determined by a selection committee that included 3 Morrison family members. Tyler Webb's family wielded power through the medical establishment that dominated Riverside's healthcare infrastructure. Dr. Richard Webb served as chief of surgery at Riverside General Hospital while maintaining a private practice that treated the county's political and business elite. Mrs. Webb chaired the hospital board and sat on the county health commission that regulated everything from restaurant inspections to school nutrition programs. The Webb family's influence over Westfield operated through health and safety regulations that could make administrative life either smooth or impossibly complicated. When Dr. Webb suggested that certain policies might create liability issues for the school district, administrators listened carefully and implemented his recommendations without question. The Webb name appeared on medical equipment throughout the school, from the nurse's office supplies to the athletic department's concussion monitoring systems. Connor Blake represented the newest form of aristocratic influence, technology wealth, that had exploded during the Silicon Valley boom and spread throughout California's secondary markets. Blake Industries had started as a small software consulting firm, but had evolved into a major government contractor specializing in educational technology systems. Every computer in Westfield High School ran software licensed from Blake Industries, while the school's security cameras, internet infrastructure, and administrative databases all bore Blake corporate fingerprints. The Blake family's power extended beyond financial influence into the realm of information control. Connor's father, Robert Blake, had designed and maintained most of the digital systems that governed Westfield's operations, from student records to security monitoring. This technological dependence created a situation where questioning Blake family interests could result in mysterious technical difficulties that disrupted everything from grade reporting to campus safety systems. These 3 families formed an interconnected network of mutual support and shared interests that effectively controlled Westfield's administrative priorities. When problems arose involving their children, the response followed predictable patterns of deflection, minimization, and ultimate protection that had been refined over decades of practice. Principal Anderson's position existed at the pleasure of this power structure, and his survival depended on maintaining delicate balances between educational responsibilities and family interests. Anderson had learned through experience that challenging the influence of major donor families led to budget crises, equipment failures, and mysteriously coordinated parent complaints that could end administrative careers. His office walls displayed photos of himself with each family's patriarch, visual reminders of relationships that superseded any theoretical commitment to equal treatment of students. The corruption extended throughout Westfield's administrative structure. Vice principals understood that disciplinary decisions involving prominent families required different considerations than those affecting ordinary students. Guidance counselors learned to phrase recommendation letters in ways that highlighted the achievements of wealthy students while downplaying incidents that might compromise their college applications. Teachers discovered that grading policies could become contentious when they affected students whose families controlled budgets, contracts, and employment opportunities. The systematic protection of privileged students had created a culture where predatory behavior flourished under the assumption that consequences would never materialize. Jake Morrison's harassment campaigns against female students had continued for years, precisely because everyone involved understood that challenging him meant challenging institutional stability. Previous victims had learned that reporting assault or harassment resulted in their own credibility being questioned, while their attackers faced, at most, temporary inconveniences that were quickly forgotten. Maya's research into Westfield's history had revealed a pattern of female teachers and students who had left the school under suspicious circumstances. Employment records showed unusually high turnover rates among young female staff members, with exit interviews citing vague concerns about school culture and administrative support. Student transfer records revealed similar patterns among girls, who had initially shown academic promise but had requested moves to other schools mid-semester without clear explanations. The protection system had evolved sophisticated methods for neutralizing threats to its stability. Students who attempted to report sexual harassment found themselves facing counter-accusations of attention-seeking behavior or false reporting. Parents who complained about their daughters' treatment discovered that their children's academic records suddenly reflected increased disciplinary problems or declining performance. Teachers who supported student complaints experienced budget cuts to their programs, reduced administrative support, or negative performance evaluations that threatened their career advancement. The most insidious aspect of Westfield's power structure was how it had normalized the systematic silencing of victims while maintaining plausible deniability about its own corruption. Administrators could honestly claim that they followed proper procedures while those procedures were designed to protect perpetrators rather than victims. The system appeared to function fairly while actually operating according to entirely different principles that prioritized institutional stability over individual safety. This was the entrenched network of wealth, influence, and institutional capture that Maya Chun would challenge when she refused to accept her designated role as Jake Morrison's latest victim. Her methodical documentation campaign and eventual physical resistance would expose not just individual predators, but the entire system that had enabled their behavior for decades. The power structure's confidence in its ability to control outcomes would prove catastrophically misplaced when confronted with someone who understood how to document evidence, manipulate media narratives, and use legal frameworks to circumvent traditional influence networks. Maya's victory would demonstrate that even the most entrenched systems of privilege and protection could be dismantled by individuals who combined careful preparation with willingness to accept the risks of direct confrontation. The feudal system that had governed Westfield High School for decades was about to encounter someone who refused to acknowledge its authority, and the collision would reshape not just the school's culture, but the broader conversation about institutional accountability and the limits of wealth-based immunity from consequences. Maya's first real test at Westfield came during the third week of October in the most mundane of settings, the school library during lunch period. She had chosen a corner table near the reference section, far from the social clusters that formed around the main study areas, hoping to spend her break reading quietly while eating the sandwich her father had packed that morning. The library had seemed like neutral territory, supervised by Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian who enforced strict policies about noise levels and appropriate behavior. Maya had been absorbed in her copy of The Handmaid's Tale, taking notes for an upcoming essay assignment, when she became aware of deliberate footsteps approaching her table. Without looking up, she could sense multiple people positioning themselves around her workspace, their presence creating the kind of tension that made other students glance over nervously before quickly returning to their own activities. Well, Jake Morrison's voice carried just enough volume to be heard by nearby students, while staying below the threshold that would attract librarian intervention. Look what we have here. The new girl all alone, reading her little book. He pulled out the chair across from Maya and sat down uninvited, his large frame filling the space in a way that felt deliberately intimidating. Maya finished the paragraph she was reading before looking up, her expression neutral and unreactive. She had learned from her Portland experience that showing fear or irritation only encouraged predators to escalate their behavior. "Hello, Jake," she said calmly, her voice pitched at the same conversational level he had used. "I'm just trying to study during lunch." Tyler Webb and Connor Blake had positioned themselves at nearby tables, close enough to participate in whatever was about to unfold but far enough away to maintain plausible deniability if questioned later. Maya noticed how other students began quietly gathering their belongings and moving to different areas of the library, recognizing the signs of impending trouble and choosing to avoid potential involvement. Studying, Jake repeated, reaching across the table to flip through Maya's notebook without permission. Very serious, very dedicated. But you know what I think? He leaned forward, invading her personal space while maintaining the pretense of casual conversation. I think you're trying too hard to prove something. Like you think you're better than everyone else here. Maya gently closed her notebook and moved it out of his reach, her movements deliberate and controlled. I think you might be misunderstanding my intentions, she replied evenly. I'm just trying to keep up with my coursework. Senior year is important for college applications. College applications. Connor Blake spoke up from his nearby table, his voice carrying a mocking tone. Where are you planning to apply? Community college? State school? Somewhere that gives scholarships to girls from broken homes. The insult was carefully crafted to sound like curiosity to any adult who might overhear while delivering maximum emotional impact to the target. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came from being deliberately provoked, but her training had taught her to recognize these physiological responses and manage them consciously. She took a slow, controlled breath and maintained her calm demeanor. I'm considering several universities, she said matter-of-factly. UC Davis has a strong English program. Jake laughed softly, the sound containing no warmth or genuine humor. UC Davis, that's ambitious for someone from your background. Tell me, Maya, what exactly makes you think you belong at a school like that? What special qualities do you bring to the table? His questions were phrased as legitimate inquiry, but Maya could hear the underlying mockery and the challenge embedded in every word. The library had grown noticeably quieter as other students became aware of the tension at Maya's table. Mrs. Henderson was busy helping someone at the circulation desk, her back turned to the main study area. Maya realized that Jake had chosen this moment deliberately, timing his approach when adult supervision was distracted and witness accounts would be filtered through the social hierarchies that protected him from consequences. I think my grades and test scores speak for themselves, Maya responded, gathering her materials and preparing to leave. She had no interest in escalating this confrontation, particularly not in a setting where she would be outnumbered and where any aggressive response on her part could be mischaracterized later. Hold on, Tyler Webb called out as Maya stood up. We're just having a friendly conversation here. Why are you in such a hurry to leave? Don't you want to get to know your new classmates better? He moved to block her path toward the library. Exit, his positioning appearing casual but effectively trapping her between the table and the reference stacks. Maya set her backpack down carefully and looked directly at Tyler, her gaze steady and unblinking. I need to get to my next class, she said clearly, her voice carrying enough volume that other students would be able to hear her words distinctly. Please let me pass. Let you pass? Jake stood up as well, his height advantage becoming more pronounced as he towered over Maya's smaller frame. That seems a little demanding, don't you think? Maybe you could ask more politely. Maybe you could show some appreciation for our attention. The dynamic had shifted from verbal harassment to something more threatening, and Maya could see several students beginning to pull out their phones, sensing that something worth recording might be about to happen. She had no desire to provide entertainment for social media consumption, but she also understood that backing down now would establish a pattern of submission that would make future harassment more likely and more severe. I am asking politely, Maya replied, her voice remaining calm despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. I need to get to class, and you're blocking my way. Please move aside. Connor Blake joined the group, completing the circle that surrounded Maya's position. You know what your problem is? He said, his tone carrying the casual cruelty that came from years of privilege and impunity. You don't understand how things work here. You think you can just show up and act like you belong, but belonging is something you have to earn. Maya understood that this was the moment she had been dreading since her first day at Westfield. The moment when hiding and blending in were no longer viable strategies, when her choice was between submission and resistance. She thought about the scared girl she had been in Portland, about the months of therapy and training that had prepared her for exactly this situation. I think you're right, Maya said quietly, her voice dropping to a level that required the three boys to lean closer to hear her clearly. I don't understand how things work here. So maybe you could explain it to me. She paused, looking directly at each of them in turn. Are you saying that students at Westfield have to earn the right to basic respect? That harassment is some kind of initiation ritual? Jake's expression darkened as he realized that Maya was not responding with the fear or submission he expected. I'm saying that new students need to learn their place in the social order. And smart students figure out how to make friends instead of enemies. I see, Maya nodded thoughtfully. And if I don't learn my place quickly enough? What happens? Then? She was deliberately forcing them to articulate their threats explicitly, creating a record of their intentions that would be harder to deny or minimize later. Tyler glanced around the library, suddenly aware that their conversation was attracting more attention than he had intended. Several students were openly watching now, and Mrs. Henderson had finished with her circulation desk duties and was beginning to look in their direction. Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere. More private, he suggested. Actually, Maya said, raising her voice slightly so that her words would carry clearly to the watching students, I think this conversation is fine right here. You were explaining to me about social order and learning my place. I'm very interested in understanding Westfield's policies about student interactions. The public nature of the confrontation had changed the dynamic entirely, and Jake Morrison found himself in the unfamiliar position of being maneuvered rather than maneuvering. Maya's refusal to be intimidated privately had forced him to either escalate publicly or back down, and neither option served his purposes. Mrs. Henderson approached their table with the authoritative stride of someone who had spent decades managing teenage behavior. Is everything all right over here? She asked, her sharp eyes taking in the body language and positioning that suggested conflict rather than casual conversation. Everything's fine, Mrs. Henderson, Jake replied smoothly, stepping back to create more space and adopting a posture of casual friendliness. We were just welcoming Maya to Westfield, helping her understand how things work around here. Maya looked directly at the librarian, making a decision that would shape every subsequent interaction with Jake Morrison and his circle. Mrs. Henderson, these three students have been blocking my path and making comments about my background and my place in the social order. I've asked them repeatedly to let me pass so I can get to my next class. The librarian's expression sharpened as she processed Maya's words. Mrs. Henderson had worked at Westfield long enough to recognize the signs of systematic harassment, and she had seen too many vulnerable students suffer in silence while their tormentors maintained facades of innocence. Mr. Morrison, Mr. Webb, Mr. Blake, she said formally, I think it's time for you to find other places to spend your lunch period. Miss Chun, you're welcome to finish your study time here in peace. Jake's mask of friendly concern slipped slightly, revealing a flash of genuine anger at being publicly dismissed by a staff member. But he was too experienced at managing his image to allow the moment to escalate further in such a public setting. Of course, Mrs. Henderson, we were just leaving anyway. As the three boys gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Jake paused next to Maya's table. This conversation isn't over, he said quietly, his words intended for her ears alone. We'll continue it soon. Maya looked up at him with an expression of polite confusion. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Could you repeat that more clearly? The request forced Jake to either repeat his threat loudly enough for Mrs. Henderson to hear or abandon it entirely. He chose to walk away without responding, but Maya could see the calculation in his eyes as he processed the implications of her refusal to be intimidated privately. After the boys left, Mrs. Henderson sat down across from Maya, her expression concerned but not surprised. "How long has this been going on?" she asked directly. Maya considered her response carefully. She had documented several incidents already, but this was the first time an adult authority figure had witnessed confrontational behavior directly. "This is the first time they've approached me so directly," she said truthfully. "But I've noticed them watching me, making comments about my background and my family situation." Mrs. Henderson nodded grimly. "Maya, I want you to know that the library is a safe space for all students. If anyone bothers you here again, you come to me immediately. And I think you should consider documenting any future incidents. Some students believe their family connections protect them from consequences, but that's not always the case." Maya thanked the librarian and finished packing her materials, but she understood that the real confrontation was just beginning. Jake Morrison had tested her response to indirect intimidation and found her unexpectedly resistant. His next approach would be more calculated, more aggressive, and more difficult to defend against using only words and adult intervention. As Maya left the library and walked toward her next class, she noticed students in the hallways watching her with new interest. Word of the library confrontation had already begun to spread through the social networks that governed teenage communication. Some students looked at her with sympathy, recognizing a fellow victim of elite privilege. Others watched with the anticipation of spectators waiting for entertainment. Maya understood that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had publicly refused to submit to Jake Morrison's intimidation, had forced him to back down in front of witnesses, and had established herself as someone who would not be quietly victimized. The next phase of their conflict would be more intense, more systematic, and more dangerous than anything she had experienced so far. Maya also felt a sense of relief at having finally stopped pretending that peaceful coexistence was possible. The quiet transfer student facade had served its purpose, giving her time to observe and prepare. Now she could focus on the real battle that had been inevitable since her first day at Westfield High School. The escalation began within 24 hours of Maya's library confrontation with Jake Morrison, manifesting first as a series of seemingly unrelated technical difficulties that disrupted her daily routine in frustrating but subtle ways. Maya's student portal account began experiencing mysterious login failures that required multiple attempts to access her grades and assignment schedules. Her locker combination, which had worked perfectly for 3 weeks, suddenly required several tries before the mechanism would engage properly. These minor irritations might have been dismissed as coincidental system glitches by a less experienced target, but Maya recognized them as opening moves in a campaign designed to create constant low-level stress while maintaining plausible deniability. Her father's background in cybersecurity had taught her to recognize patterns of deliberate interference disguised as technical problems. The digital harassment expanded rapidly into more aggressive territory. Maya discovered that someone had created fake social media profiles using her name and photographs, posting content designed to damage her reputation among classmates and teachers. The fake accounts shared opinions about drug use, sexual activities, and academic dishonesty that directly contradicted Maya's carefully maintained image as a serious student from a stable family background. The sophistication of the fake profiles suggested access to advanced photo editing software and detailed knowledge of Maya's personal information that went beyond what would be available through casual observation. Whoever was creating these accounts had researched her background extensively, incorporating details about her Portland address, her father's employment history, and even references to her mother's abandonment that Maya had never shared with anyone at Westfield. Maya began documenting each incident with forensic precision, taking screenshots of fake profiles before they were deleted, recording the exact times and circumstances of technical failures, and maintaining detailed logs of every suspicious interaction or communication. Her evidence collection methodology reflected lessons learned from the Portland case, where inadequate documentation had allowed her attackers to escape serious consequences. The harassment campaign expanded into physical intimidation during Maya's 4th week at Westfield. She began finding her car surrounded by other vehicles in the student parking lot, boxed in so tightly that extraction required multiple attempts at careful maneuvering. The positioning appeared accidental to casual observers, but Maya noted that the same cars were consistently involved in creating these inconvenient situations. More disturbing were the items that began appearing in her locker, despite her certainty that she had secured it properly each time. Explicit photographs that could be explained as student pranks, anonymous notes containing detailed descriptions of sexual acts that would be performed on her, and small personal items that seemed to have been taken from her backpack during classes when she was away from her seat. The psychological impact was carefully calculated to create paranoia and hypervigilance while avoiding the kind of overt threats that would trigger immediate administrative intervention. Maya found herself constantly checking her belongings, second-guessing whether she had locked her locker properly, and wondering which of her classmates might be participating in the campaign against her. Maya's AP literature class became a particular focus of harassment activity. During group discussions, other students would ask pointed questions about her background that seemed designed to expose inconsistencies in her cover story. When she contributed thoughtful analysis of assigned readings, classmates would respond with comments that subtly questioned her intelligence or suggested that her insights were pretentious rather than perceptive. The harassment followed patterns that Maya recognized from research into systematic bullying campaigns. Perpetrators used social isolation tactics to cut her off from potential allies, spreading rumors about her background and behavior that made other students wary of association. They employed gaslighting techniques to make her question her own perceptions and memories of events. Most insidiously, they used Maya's own academic performance against her, suggesting that her good grades were the result of inappropriate relationships with teachers or academic dishonesty rather than legitimate effort and ability. These attacks targeted her sense of personal integrity and accomplishment, while being phrased as concerned observations rather than direct accusations. The campaign's psychological sophistication suggested coordination by someone with detailed knowledge of effective intimidation strategies. Maya suspected that Connor Blake's family connections to educational technology systems provided access to research and resources that elevated their harassment techniques beyond typical teenage bullying. Maya's lunch periods became exercises in social navigation as she discovered that her presence at different tables was consistently unwelcome. Students who had initially been friendly began avoiding eye contact and ending conversations when she approached. The social isolation was systematic and comprehensive, cutting her off from the casual interactions that made school environments tolerable for most teenagers. During her 5th week, the harassment expanded into academic sabotage. Maya's carefully completed homework assignments began disappearing from her backpack between classes, forcing her to explain missing work to teachers who expressed concern about her organizational skills and academic commitment. Her participation in group projects became problematic, as other students found excuses to exclude her or minimize her contributions. The sabotage extended to Maya's computer work, with files corrupting mysteriously and email communications failing to reach intended recipients. Her research for major assignments was compromised by technical failures that occurred at crucial moments, creating stress and forcing her to recreate work that had taken hours to complete originally. Maya realized that the harassment campaign had evolved beyond simple intimidation into a comprehensive assault on her academic standing and social connections. The perpetrators were attempting to destroy her credibility with teachers and administrators, while isolating her from peer support that might help her resist their psychological pressure. The physical elements of the campaign became more aggressive during Maya's 6th week. She began experiencing deliberate collisions in crowded hallways, with students bumping into her hard enough to knock her off balance, while maintaining the appearance of accidental contact. Her backpack was repeatedly knocked off her shoulder, spilling contents that she had to gather quickly while other students stepped around her without offering assistance. Maya's car became a target for escalating property damage. First, someone scattered nails around her parking space, causing a slow tire leak that required professional repair. Then her windshield was cracked by what appeared to be impact from a thrown object, though no witnesses could be found and security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the relevant time period. The systematic nature of the technical surveillance failures convinced Maya that the harassment campaign had institutional support, or at least institutional complicity. Someone with administrative access was ensuring that evidence of harassment activity would not be captured by official monitoring systems. Maya's documentation efforts became more sophisticated as she realized that standard evidence collection methods would be insufficient against opponents with access to advanced technology and institutional protection. She began using multiple recording devices, creating redundant backup systems for her evidence files, and establishing secure communication channels with her father that couldn't be easily intercepted or corrupted. The harassment campaign's psychological pressure was supplemented by economic intimidation tactics. Maya discovered that her father's employer had received anonymous complaints about his work performance, suggesting that the harassment network had investigated her family background and identified vulnerabilities that extended beyond the school environment. The realization that her family's financial security was being threatened added a new dimension of stress to Maya's situation. She understood that perpetrators were demonstrating their ability to impact her life beyond the boundaries of Westfield High School, showing that submission to their demands was the only way to protect her father's employment and their housing situation. Maya's sleep patterns became disrupted as the cumulative stress of constant harassment took its physical toll. She found herself lying awake at night, mentally reviewing each day's incidents and trying to anticipate the next escalation. The hypervigilance that had been necessary for survival was becoming exhausting to maintain at such intensity. The campaign's effectiveness was measured not just in Maya's obvious distress, but in the behavior of other students who witnessed the systematic targeting. Potential allies learned to avoid association with Maya to protect themselves from becoming secondary targets. Teachers began to view her as a problem student who attracted drama and disruption rather than a victim deserving protection and support. Maya understood that she was experiencing a sophisticated form of psychological warfare, designed to break her resistance through accumulated stress rather than single dramatic confrontations. The perpetrators had learned from previous campaigns that dramatic incidents risked creating sympathetic witnesses and documentary evidence that could be used against them. As her 7th week at Westfield began, Maya realized that the harassment campaign had reached a level of intensity that required decisive response. Her careful documentation had created a comprehensive record of systematic abuse, but the perpetrators' institutional connections and technological advantages meant that traditional complaint procedures would likely prove ineffective. Maya began preparing for the confrontation that she now understood was inevitable. The systematic intimidation campaign had served its purpose from the perpetrator's perspective, isolating her from support systems and demonstrating their power to disrupt her life with impunity. But it had also served Maya's purposes, providing extensive documentation of their behavior patterns and revealing the full scope of the network arrayed against her. The game had reached a point where escalation was inevitable, and Maya was ready. to ensure that the next phase would be fought on terms that favored her training, preparation, and legal understanding rather than her opponent's wealth and institutional connections. Maya's first attempt to seek institutional protection through proper channels began on a Thursday morning in late November, when she requested a meeting with Principal Anderson to discuss what she diplomatically termed ongoing social adjustment challenges. She had prepared extensively for this conversation, organizing her documentation into clear categories and rehearsing presentations that would demonstrate the systematic nature of the harassment while avoiding language that might trigger defensive responses from school administrators. Principal Anderson's office reflected the political balancing act that defined his position at Westfield High School. Photographs of him with various donor families lined the walls alongside official certificates and awards that emphasized his role in maintaining school traditions and community partnerships. His desk displayed small tokens of appreciation from prominent families whose children had graduated under his leadership, visual reminders of relationships that superseded official policies about equal treatment. Maya entered the meeting with realistic expectations based on her Portland experience, but she hoped that Westfield's different administrative structure might produce more supportive responses to documented harassment complaints. She had prepared multiple presentation strategies, ready to adapt her approach based on Anderson's initial reactions to her concerns. "Principal Anderson, thank you for making time to meet with me," Maya began, settling into the chair across from his desk with her documentation folder arranged neatly in her lap. "I wanted to discuss some challenges I've been experiencing with other students that I believe require administrative attention." Anderson glanced at his watch, a gesture that immediately signaled his expectation that this would be a brief conversation about typical teenage social drama. "Of course, Maya. I understand that transferring schools can be difficult, especially during senior year. What specific issues are you encountering?" Maya opened her folder and withdrew her first category of evidence, screenshots of fake social media profiles that had been created using her name and photograph. "Over the past 6 weeks, someone has been creating false online profiles using my identity to post inappropriate content. I've documented dozens of these accounts, and they all appear to originate from sources connected to the school." Anderson examined the screenshots with obvious discomfort, his expression suggesting that he preferred not to engage with evidence of student misconduct that might require serious administrative response. "Social media harassment is unfortunately common among teenagers," he said after a brief review. "These platforms make it easy for students to create anonymous accounts. It's very difficult to determine who's actually responsible for this type of activity." Maya had anticipated this response and was prepared with her second category of evidence, detailed logs of technical failures affecting her school accounts and equipment. "Principal Anderson, the digital harassment is just one component of a larger pattern. I've also documented systematic interference with my school technology access, repeated incidents of property damage in the parking lot, and physical intimidation in hallways and classrooms." She spread additional documentation across Anderson's desk, creating a visual display of the evidence she had accumulated. "These incidents follow patterns that suggest coordination by multiple individuals with access to school systems and detailed knowledge of my daily routines." Anderson's expression grew more uncomfortable as he realized that Maya's complaint was far more comprehensive and well documented than he had expected. His typical strategies for managing student grievances relied on the assumption that complainants would be emotional, disorganized, and easily discouraged by bureaucratic deflection. "These are serious allegations, Maya," Anderson said carefully, his tone suggesting skepticism rather than concern. "But I need to point out that most of these incidents could have innocent explanations. Technical problems are common in school systems. Parking lot damage happens frequently, and teenager conflicts often involve misunderstandings rather than deliberate harassment. Maya maintained her calm demeanor while internally noting Anderson's immediate resort to minimization. Tactics. Principal Anderson, I understand that individual incidents might seem ambiguous, but the cumulative pattern shows clear intent to systematically disrupt my education and social integration. I've documented over 40 separate incidents in 6 weeks, all targeting me specifically. Anderson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly wishing this conversation would conclude quickly. Maya, I appreciate your thoroughness in documenting these concerns, but I have to ask whether you might be interpreting normal teenage behavior through the lens of previous experiences. Transfer students sometimes have adjustment difficulties that affect their perception of social interactions. The suggestion that her complaints reflected psychological problems rather than legitimate grievances was exactly the response Maya had experienced in Portland, and she recognized it as a standard technique for discrediting harassment victims while protecting perpetrators. Principal Anderson, are you suggesting that fake social media profiles using my name and photograph represent normal teenage behavior, or that someone accessing my locker to leave threatening notes is a misunderstanding? Anderson's discomfort increased as Maya refused to accept his minimization efforts. I'm suggesting that we need to be careful about making accusations without clear evidence of specific wrongdoing by identifiable individuals. The students you're implying are involved in this alleged harassment are good kids from respected families who have contributed significantly to our school community. Maya noted Anderson's use of economic and social status as character references, a tactic that revealed his actual priorities in evaluating student complaints. So you're saying that students from wealthy families should be presumed innocent of harassment because of their family backgrounds? I'm saying that we need to consider all factors when evaluating complaints, Anderson replied defensively. Jake Morrison is our starting quarterback with a 3.8 GPA and plans to attend college on an athletic scholarship. Tyler Webb has been student body vice president and volunteers extensively in community service programs. Connor Blake's family has made generous donations that benefit all students through improved technology resources. Maya realized that Anderson's response had confirmed her worst suspicions about institutional protection for privileged students. Principal Anderson, I'm not questioning their academic achievements or family contributions. I'm documenting systematic harassment that is disrupting my education and creating a hostile school environment. Anderson's expression hardened as he recognized that Maya would not be easily discouraged or deflected. Maya, I think you need to understand something about Westfield High School. We have a strong community here, built on relationships and mutual respect that have developed over many years. Students who integrate successfully learn to appreciate our traditions and find ways to contribute positively to our culture. The implication was clear. Maya's harassment was her own fault for failing to submit to established social hierarchies. Anderson was suggesting that compliance with informal power structures was a prerequisite for educational access, and that resistance to intimidation represented antisocial behavior rather than legitimate self-defense. Are you telling me that accepting harassment is a requirement for academic success at Westfield? Maya asked directly, forcing Anderson to articulate his position explicitly. I'm telling you that students who focus on building positive relationships rather than looking for conflicts tend to have better experiences here, Anderson replied, his tone suggesting that this conversation was approaching its conclusion. Perhaps you might consider adjusting your approach to social interactions. Sometimes a little flexibility can prevent misunderstandings from escalating. Maya gathered her documentation with deliberate precision, understanding that Anderson's response had eliminated any possibility of institutional protection through normal channels. Principal Anderson, I want to be clear about what I'm hearing. You're suggesting that I should accept systematic harassment in order to avoid conflicts with students whose families have political and economic influence over this school. Anderson's Expression became coldly professional as he realized that Maya was creating a record of his institutional failure. I'm suggesting that you focus on your education rather than looking for problems that may not exist. Your transfer application indicated that you left your previous school due to social difficulties. Perhaps the common factor in these situations is something you should examine. The reference to her Portland experience was a calculated attack, designed to undermine Maya's credibility by suggesting a pattern of problematic behavior on her part. Anderson was using confidential information from her student file to imply that she was a chronic complainer rather than a legitimate victim of harassment. Maya stood up slowly, maintaining her composure despite the anger building in her chest. Thank you for clarifying Westfield's position on student harassment complaints. I'll be sure to include your responses in my documentation of this meeting. Anderson's expression sharpened as he realized that Maya was treating their conversation as part of an ongoing legal record rather than an internal disciplinary matter. Maya, I hope you'll reconsider your approach to these social challenges. I'd hate to see your academic performance affected by unnecessary drama during your senior year. The threat was subtle but unmistakable, continuing to pursue harassment. Complaints would result in academic retaliation designed to damage Maya's college application prospects. Anderson was demonstrating the same institutional capture that had protected her Portland attackers, confirming that Westfield's administration would prioritize donor family interests over student safety. Maya left Anderson's office with absolute clarity about her situation. She could not rely on school administrators for protection or support, and her documentation of institutional failure would be crucial for any external legal or regulatory intervention that might become necessary. That afternoon, Maya requested a meeting with her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Hoffman, hoping that someone in a support role rather than administrative authority might respond more appropriately to documented harassment complaints. Mrs. Hoffman had initially seemed sympathetic to Maya's adjustment challenges, and Maya hoped that presenting her evidence to someone focused on student welfare rather than institutional politics might produce different results. Mrs. Hoffman's office was smaller and more personal than Anderson's, decorated with motivational posters about college success and photographs of former students who had achieved academic recognition. Her demeanor was warmer and more approachable than Anderson's had been, suggesting genuine concern for student well-being rather than political calculation. Maya, I understand you've been having some social difficulties since transferring here. Mrs. Hoffman began, her tone conveying empathy and professional interest. How can I help you work through these challenges? Maya decided to test whether Mrs. Hoffman would respond differently to the same evidence that Anderson had dismissed. Mrs. Hoffman, I've been experiencing systematic harassment from other students that's affecting my ability to focus on academics. I've documented extensive evidence of coordinated intimidation, digital harassment, and property damage. Mrs. Hoffman's expression remained supportive as Maya presented her evidence folders, but Maya noticed subtle changes in body language that suggested discomfort with the implications of comprehensive documentation. This does seem like a serious situation, Mrs. Hoffman said after reviewing selected materials. Have you discussed these concerns with Principal Anderson? I met with him this morning, Maya replied. He suggested that the harassment was my fault for not integrating properly into Westfield's social culture, and that I should accept it rather than file complaints. Mrs. Hoffman's expression grew troubled as she processed the implications of Anderson's response. That's concerning, Maya. Every student has the right to a safe, educational environment, regardless of their social background or integration status. Maya felt a moment of hope that Mrs. Hoffman might provide the institutional support that Anderson had refused. Mrs. Hoffman, I need someone in the administration to take this harassment seriously and implement protective measures while I complete my senior year. Mrs. Hoffman was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with competing loyalties and institutional pressures. Maya, I want to help you, but I also need to be realistic about what's possible within our current system. The students you're identifying as harassers have significant family connections that complicate administrative responses. Maya's hope began to fade as she recognized the same institutional capture affecting Mrs. Hoffman's advice. So you're saying that family wealth and political influence override harassment policies? I'm saying that addressing this situation will require careful planning and realistic expectations about outcomes. Mrs. Hoffman replied diplomatically. Perhaps we could focus on strategies that would help you complete your senior year successfully, without escalating conflicts that might be difficult to resolve through normal channels. Maya understood that Mrs. Hoffman was offering survival strategies rather than justice or protection. The guidance counselor was essentially advising Maya to endure systematic harassment because challenging it would be futile given the perpetrator's institutional protection. Mrs. Hoffman, what message does it send to other students when the administration protects harassers because of their family backgrounds? Maya asked. How many other students have been forced to endure similar treatment because their families don't have enough political influence to demand protection? Mrs. Hoffman's expression became pained as she confronted the moral implications of the advice she was providing. Maya, I understand your frustration, but my job is to help you succeed academically despite these social challenges. Sometimes that means accepting situations we can't change and focusing on goals we can achieve. Maya gathered her materials. Once again, understanding that institutional protection would not come from guidance counseling services any more than from administrative leadership. Mrs. Hoffman, thank you for being honest about Westfield's priorities. At least now I understand exactly what I'm dealing with. The failure of both administrative and counseling support confirmed that Maya would have to rely entirely on her own resources in preparation for the confrontation that was now inevitable. Westfield High School had demonstrated the same institutional corruption that had failed her in Portland, but this time Maya was prepared for the system's betrayal and ready to implement solutions that didn't depend on adult protection or institutional justice. Maya's realization that institutional protection would not materialize marked the beginning of her most intensive preparation phase, during which every aspect of her daily routine became carefully calculated to maximize her advantages while minimizing her vulnerabilities. She understood that her confrontation with Jake Morrison and his network was inevitable, and that her survival would depend entirely on her ability to control the circumstances, timing, and documentation of that encounter. Her first priority involved upgrading her evidence collection capabilities beyond the basic smartphone recordings and written logs that had proven insufficient during her Portland experience. Maya invested her savings in professional-grade recording equipment small enough to be concealed within her clothing and backpack, ensuring that future incidents would be captured with audio and video quality that could withstand legal scrutiny. Maya's father assisted with the technical aspects of her surveillance preparations, helping her establish encrypted cloud storage systems that would preserve evidence even if her physical devices were confiscated or destroyed. They created multiple backup protocols with evidence automatically copying to several secure locations that couldn't be accessed or compromised by anyone with school system administrative privileges. The digital security preparations extended to Maya's personal communications, with father and daughter establishing coded messaging systems that would allow them to coordinate responses to escalating harassment without revealing their strategies to anyone monitoring their electronic communications. David Chun's cybersecurity expertise proved invaluable in creating communication channels that would remain secure even under sophisticated surveillance. Maya's physical preparation intensified during evening training sessions in their apartment, where she practiced the specific techniques most likely to be effective in the confined spaces and public settings where confrontations typically occurred at Westfield. She focused on defensive methods that would appear clearly reactive to observers, while being devastatingly effective against multiple attackers who relied on size and intimidation rather than actual fighting skills. Her mental preparation involved detailed visualization exercises where Maya rehearsed potential confrontation scenarios, planning her responses to different types of attacks, while considering how each situation would appear to recording devices and witnesses. Sensei Williams had taught her that real self-defense involved psychological preparation as much as physical technique, and Maya spent hours mentally rehearsing the calm, controlled demeanor she would need to maintain during actual confrontations. Maya's study of legal frameworks intensified as she researched California's specific laws regarding self-defense, assault, and sexual battery. She memorized the exact language that would establish legal justification for physical resistance while avoiding terminology that might suggest premeditation or excessive force. Her Portland experience had taught her that legal outcomes often depended more on precise documentation and presentation than on the actual facts of confrontational situations. The timing of Maya's preparation intensified as she observed escalating patterns in the harassment campaign that suggested her tormentors were building toward a major confrontation designed to break her resistance permanently. The ambush was scheduled for Friday afternoon during the final week of November, timing that Jake Morrison had calculated to maximize psychological impact while minimizing administrative oversight. Maya had detected the unusual patterns of communication and positioning that preceded major harassment escalations, noting how Jake's circle of supporters had begun congregating in specific areas of the school with increasing frequency, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever she passed within hearing range. Maya's surveillance of social media activity had revealed cryptic references to finishing what we started and teaching lessons about respect that appeared in private group chats she had gained access to through careful digital investigation. The language was coded, but clearly referenced her ongoing resistance to their intimidation campaign, with several participants expressing frustration that their previous methods had failed to achieve the submission they expected from harassment. Targets. The location Jake had chosen for his planned confrontation was the old gymnasium complex, a section of Westfield High School that had been largely abandoned since the construction of newer athletic facilities. The area was scheduled for renovation during winter break, leaving it currently empty of regular classes or supervised activities. Maya recognized the tactical advantages the location offered to attackers: multiple entry and exit points, minimal surveillance coverage, and legitimate reasons for students to be present without raising suspicions. Maya's analysis of the harassment network's communication patterns revealed that Jake had recruited significantly more participants for this final confrontation than he had used in previous incidents. Screenshots of group messages showed at least 15 students had been invited to witness what Jake described as the new girls' graduation ceremony, language that clearly referenced some form of public humiliation designed to establish permanent social dominance. The recruitment tactics Jake had employed demonstrated sophisticated understanding of peer pressure dynamics and social manipulation. He had approached students who owed him social favors, those seeking acceptance into his elite circle, and others who could be motivated through promises of entertainment or threats of becoming targets themselves. The resulting coalition represented a cross-section of Westfield's student body united primarily by their desire to avoid Jake's displeasure. Maya's preparation for the inevitable confrontation included detailed reconnaissance of the old gymnasium complex, conducted during early morning hours when the building was empty but unlocked for maintenance access. She memorized the layout of corridors, identified potential escape routes, and located areas where surveillance cameras remained functional despite the general abandonment of the space. The timing of Jake's planned ambush coincided with several factors that Maya recognized as strategically chosen to maximize his advantages. Friday afternoon meant that most teachers and administrators would be focused on weekend preparations rather than monitoring student activities in unused areas of the school. The approach of winter break suggested that any disciplinary consequences might be delayed or forgotten during the holiday period. Maya's digital monitoring revealed that Connor Blake had been tasked with ensuring that security camera coverage in the old gymnasium would be conveniently disrupted during the planned confrontation. Messages between Connor and his father's technical support staff indicated that a routine maintenance update would affect surveillance systems in that section of the building at precisely the time Jake intended to corner Maya. The systematic elimination of adult supervision and electronic monitoring demonstrated the sophisticated planning capabilities that Jake's network could deploy when they decided to escalate beyond casual harassment. Maya understood that she was facing opponents who had institutional connections, technological resources, and detailed knowledge of Westfield's security vulnerabilities. Maya's analysis of Jake's psychological profile suggested that his planned confrontation would involve sexual humiliation, designed to create compromising recordings that could be used for ongoing blackmail and intimidation. The pattern of escalation from property damage to digital harassment to planned physical assault followed trajectories that Maya had studied in her research into predatory behavior among privileged adolescents. The recruitment of multiple witnesses served several strategic purposes in Jake's planning. The presence of recording devices would create documentation that could be edited and manipulated to support narratives favorable to the attackers while making Maya's eventual testimony less credible. The crowd dynamic would provide psychological pressure designed to overwhelm Maya's resistance while distributing responsibility among multiple participants. Maya's preparation included careful consideration of how to manipulate the planned ambush to serve her own strategic objectives. She needed Jake and his supporters to commit clearly documented crimes while providing her with unambiguous legal justification for defensive responses. The challenge was ensuring that their attack would be severe enough to justify her level of resistance while maintaining her safety during the confrontation. Maya's study of group dynamics in assault situations had taught her that crowds of attackers typically relied on intimidation rather than actual violence, expecting their targets to submit rather than resist. This psychological dependency represented a vulnerability that could be exploited by someone prepared to respond with immediate, overwhelming force that disrupted the attacker's assumptions about power dynamics. The week leading up to Jake's planned confrontation featured intensifying harassment designed to destabilize Maya's emotional equilibrium and reduce her ability to respond effectively during the actual assault. Anonymous messages became more explicitly threatening. Property damage escalated to include slashed tires and broken windows, and physical intimidation in hallways became more aggressive and persistent. Maya documented each escalation with meticulous attention to detail, understanding that the pattern of increasing harassment would support her eventual claims of systematic targeting and reasonable fear for her safety. Her evidence files now contained hundreds of documented incidents spanning 2 months of systematic intimidation, creating an undeniable record of premeditated harassment. Maya's mental preparation during the final week involved meditation and visualization exercises, designed to maintain her emotional stability under extreme stress. She practiced controlling her physiological responses to confrontational situations, ensuring that adrenaline would enhance rather than compromise her defensive capabilities when violence became inevitable. The strategic positioning of her recording equipment required careful consideration of camera angles and audio pickup patterns that would capture the full scope of the planned assault while remaining concealed from her attackers. Maya had learned from her Portland experience that evidence quality often determined legal outcomes more than the actual facts of confrontational situations. Maya's communication with her father during this preparation phase involved coded updates about the escalating harassment and coordinated planning for responses to different possible outcomes. David Chun had contacted legal counsel and prepared documentation that would support immediate criminal complaints and civil litigation if the confrontation resulted in assault charges. The final element of Maya's preparation involved psychological acceptance of the violence that was now inevitable. She understood that Jake Morrison's network had progressed beyond harassment into planned physical assault, and that her only options were submission or resistance. Maya had already decided that she would never again allow herself to be victimized by predators who relied on institutional protection and victim silence. As Friday afternoon approached, Maya felt the calm that came from complete preparation and absolute clarity about her situation. She had documented extensive evidence of systematic harassment, identified the full scope of the network arrayed against her, and prepared comprehensive responses to the confrontation that would determine not just her own fate, but the future of predatory behavior at Westfield High School. The trap that Jake Morrison believed he was setting for Maya had actually become the trap that Maya was setting for him, transforming his planned victory into the means of his own destruction. The quiet transfer student who had seemed like such an easy target was about to demonstrate that some apparent victims were actually predators waiting for their moment to strike back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.